Hello, my name is Adam Kogel, and I'm a Middle East researcher at Human Rights Watch. I specialize in human rights in the Gulf. It's a privilege to address today's conference for the 2015 Award for Arab Rights Defenders in the Arab World. The recipient of tonight's award is Talib al-Mamari. Tonight I want to talk just a little bit about the context for human rights in Oman, and then after that I'll say a little bit about Mr. al-Mamari. Oman historically has not really been associated with human rights. Oman has been sort of thought of as a backwater, a place which was very quiet, where citizens didn't make demands on their governments, and that there wasn't really much of a human rights culture. Now that all really came to an end in the year 2011, partly inspired by Arab uprisings going on in Egypt, Tunisia, and other places. Omani citizens took to the streets and made demands on their government. These included economic demands for higher wages, for more job opportunities, but they also called for greater respect for human rights and more democracy in the country. These protests that went on across the country in Muscat and in other cities led to the establishment of a nascent human rights community, with groups of activists coming together, learning about human rights work, getting to know one another, learning how to do social media activism and in-person activism. Perhaps the largest demonstration in Oman took place at the Globe Roundabout in the northern town of Sohar, where several thousand Omanis blocked the square and protested and demanded that their government make positive changes. Now, Omani authorities responded by putting down this protest with force, and in fact ended up crushing all of the pro-democracy and pro-reform protests that were going on in the country. One of the speakers at the Globe Roundabout during those days was Talib al-Mamari himself. He addressed the crowd. He had a pro-reform message. And unfortunately, this human rights community that was developed, the Omani authorities since that time have been trying to crush it. They have arrested scores of activists. They have prosecuted them. They have jailed them. Eventually, most of them were pardoned in 2013. But unfortunately, the harassment and the jailing of activists continues. Just this summer, we saw a group of 5 or 6 activists who were arrested, apparently for having links with each other, and apparently for also speaking about human rights to outside organizations. Were all called in for questioning and held for several days. Eventually, they were all released and without charge, as far as I understand. But it's important to note that this goes on. And I think Talib al-Ma'mari's story is really part of this. Now, I should say, in mid-2014, I actually went to Muscat and interviewed a family member of Talib al-Ma'mari to hear more about his story. He is a graduate of Sohar University and specializes in Arabic language and linguistics. He was a community leader in a northern area called Liwa, which is near Oman's major port, and because of that has suffered severe environmental damage that residents believe has led to a degradation of health of the citizens of that area. Now, Talib was always a community leader and working with the government to actually relocate those residents. But over the years, the residents' grievances increased because they felt like the government was going too slow on the relocation and they weren't cleaning up the area. These residents got together and in mid-2014 organized a pretty large-scale protest at the port. Al-Mamari was certainly at the protests. His family argues that he was there trying to calm the demonstrators and he was trying to negotiate between the government and the demonstrators. But unfortunately, things got out of hand. Everybody that Human Rights Watch has interviewed said the protesters were purely peaceful, but that the authorities moved in and forcibly dispersed them anyway. After the protest was dispersed, authorities arrested al-Mamari. They charged him with harming the prestige of the state, blocking a public road, as well as illegal gathering, among a host of other sort of vague charges. They eventually convicted him and sentenced him to 4 years and 500 Omani rials. This verdict was eventually vacated, and then on a retrial, he was actually sentenced to 4 years again and 700 Omani rials. We think that Talib al-Ma'mari, based on the trial as it went, we believe that he probably should never have been charged in the first place. We think Oman is probably persecuting him because as an elected representative, in fact, from Sohar, he was very critical of Omani policies. Amnesty International has called him a prisoner of conscience, and in fact, in 2014, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention classified his detention as arbitrary and said he's entitled to compensation from the Omani government. If Oman really wants to clean up its image, it really needs to halt its harsh repression of human rights activists and peaceful dissidents, among them Talib al-Mamari. It should immediately release him. It should also clean up and amend some of these vague laws that it uses to curtail basic rights. Thank you.